Now we want to speak about web programming. Web programming, this is a very broad term, and this term is used to subsume different things. So, for example, the so-called client-side and the server-side programming. These are what is considered as web programming. But also middleware architectures or web services are considered under the term web programming. In this and the next week, we concentrate on this client-side and server-side programming. First, we start in the first week and this week, we start with the client-side programming. We will discuss dynamic HTML documents. We will discuss the document object model, already mentioned in earlier clips. We speak about JavaScript. We consider JavaScript libraries and JavaScript frameworks, and given an insight in some new script languages, CoffeeScript and Dart, not only script languages but environments to design applications for client-side programming. Then in week 5, next week we consider server-side programming. We discuss web frameworks and MVC. We will discuss session management, persistence and database layer, and we will introduce asynchronous client-server communication, AX, which is so important for social media application, and we end up with web-based application programming interfaces and web services with the REST architecture. What is client programming? Client programming is the idea that a web page can be adapted to the wishes and to the needs of the user, and this adaptation are done on the client side. So the web server passes a web document, and in this web document there is some program code embedded, executable or interpretable program code, and when the client receives this document, then on the client side this program code is executed. So the browser, the web clients need an interpreter. Typically this is a plugin for the browser, which together with the client computer is able to interpret and execute the transferred program code. There are different possibilities, for example, by means of Java and Java applets. JavaScript programs, or shortly called script, are an important way for such client-side programming. A little bit older is the Microsoft Silverlight and Adobe Flash approach. On the other side, if we speak about server-side programming, then the same idea that a web document is adapted exactly to the wishes of the client, but now this document is produced on side of the server. So the web application is activated from the web browser, who sends a request to the web server, and then at the server machine this application is executed and the desired dynamic web page is produced. So the results are generated dynamically on the server side, and then this dynamically created web document is transferred to the client, to the browser. So what is needed is an interaction of the web server with the different applications which are able to produce such a dynamic web page. And there is a standardized interface. This is the ZGI, Common Gateway interface, the ZGI interface, which standardizes the interface on the server side between the web server and the different web application used to produce such dynamic HTML pages. The web pages, the web applications on the server side can be written in any program language. So for example, Java. So there are Java, there are servlets, there are server pages, beans. These are typical applications on the server side written in Java. But these applications can also be written in a scripting language. ASP, PHP, Perl, Python, Ruby. These are a series of scripting language. And what we see today in most cases is that web frameworks are used to design such applications, such web applications on server side. So famous web frameworks are Ruby on Rails or Spring or Django. There are different types of documents, of web documents. We just mentioned this. There are static web documents, and there are web documents that are produced, that are dynamically produced on client side or on server side to design web pages exactly according to the wishes of an user. So there exist statically pages. The statical pages are stored on the web server in the file system of the web server, and then the browser can request this document, and then the document is transferred in this form to the client and is displayed. So it's not changing its content, it's not adapted exactly to the wishes of the client. The dynamically generated web pages, they can adapt exactly to the needs of the client. They are generated by a web application. They are generated according to the parameters, to the wishes from the user, which are passed from the browser to the web server, and then they can, for example, requesting a search machine or others, exactly send this information, display this information to the user wants. So, for example, practically, I already mentioned is if a user wants to query a database. This is needed, for example, if the user wants to buy something, if the user wants to check the product catalog of a company, for example, of Amazon, and likes to select some special product. Or if the user wants to use a search engine to send an information and to send a word and then to get back information about this, which is available in the web, for example, search machines like Google or newspapers, New York Times. You can request over the web, and you can adapt exactly which kind of information you want to have. So this dynamically generated web pages, this is what users like most, because it's exactly that information they want to have. Now let's look to these simple illustrations. Let's start with having a look to static web pages. We have in the web the two players, the browser, the client, and the server, the web server, and then the client requests an information. The server has this information, has a web page in his local file system. When the browser requests this information, he requests it, you remember, by giving the address of the web server, the IP address, and then giving the path where this file, this static HTML document, is stored on server side. And then the page is taken and is transferred to the customer. So here, local file, the HTML page, it's static, it's already produced, will not be modified, is stored in the local file system, and then this is transferred to the customer. Now let's consider dynamic web pages. Dynamic web pages can be generated on the server side as well on the client side. Let's start to have a look on the dynamic web pages generated on server side. There is the browser again and the web server, the two players in the web. The browser requests an information, and now the server hands over the parameters the server knows what kind of application is necessary to produce the web page requested by the browser, and the server sees what are the parameters the user has sent to this application to produce exactly the dynamic web page for his wishes. So the server hands over the data to the corresponding application. Then the application produces dynamically the HTML document, and then this is transferred to the client. So the application produces the dynamic web document, and then it's transferred to the browser and displayed there. This is the server-side programming, and now we look to the dynamic web pages that are generated on client side. Again, we have our browser and we have our server. And now the browser requests from the web server a document, a dynamic HTML document. And the characteristic is that inside that document there is program code. So the HTML document is transferred to the browser, to the client, and then on the client side, the code that's embedded in the dynamic HTML document is executed, and then on the browser, the dynamically generated web page is displayed to the client.